The fact that we're not allowed to talk about this is sort of the ultimate irony. I say not allowed because we are, obviously. We're talking about it now, I'm talking about it, but the fact that as a nation, the President of the United States, especially as a man of color, is not allowed to, in the sense that if he does, he gets in all kinds of trouble. You know, this is a man where even if he talks a little bit about race, a little bit, he gets attacked, right? So back last year when, remember the story in the news about Henry Louis Gates, who's a professor at Harvard, right? And one of the most prominent black academics in the world, actually. Lived in that community for years, but he was trying to get into his own house and he wasn't recognized by one of his neighbors. And this neighbor, this older white woman, was like, who's this black dude trying to break, must be breaking in, right? And keep in mind, now Henry Louis Gates is like 57 and walks with a cane, all right? So how many 57-year-old black, white, brown, or any other kind of person do you know that like are burglars? Like, you know, I'm gonna roll up with my cane and break and enter on this house. And, you know, I mean, that just isn't even logical, but this woman sees him, oh my God, what's up with him? And she gets this other white woman who wasn't from the neighborhood. So you can sort of say, okay, maybe she didn't recognize this guy. Gets her to call the police. She calls the police, the cops come out. By the time they get there, he's in the house. They come in, they ask him for ID. He gives them ID, but he also gives them a little bit of attitude, which you would too, right? If somebody accused you of breaking into your own damn home, you would also say something, right? So he got a little bit of an attitude with them, which, you know, and he got him on the porch, and he yelled at him, and he also ran the dozens on this cop, which for the white people who don't know what I'm talking about, means that he basically said, when the cop said, you need to come out on the porch, his answer was, I'll see your mama on the porch. So, now, I don't recommend that you do this to a cop. I don't recommend it. I don't recommend it. It's not necessarily a good, but it's not illegal. It's not illegal to do. It might be dangerous, it might be risky, it might be stupid, but it's not against the law. They then arrest him, however, for disorderly conduct, right? They arrest him, they take him downtown, and the charges got dropped. But what was interesting was the next day they asked the president about the incident, right? Because the president, when he was at Harvard Law, he knew Henry Louis Gates, right? And so this was an old friend of his, so they asked him, and the president, you may recall, his answer was really pretty calm. I mean, all he said was, look, I think the Cambridge police acted stupidly, right, by arresting him, especially when it's so obvious he lived there. And even if you read the arrest report, the cop actually says in the arrest report, I came to conclude that this was in all likelihood the house of the suspect or whatever. So then the question is, why are you sticking around? If you think it's his house, just turn around and leave. Like, you don't have to be there anymore. But of course he stuck around until Henry Louis Gates gave him level and then he could arrest him. So the president says, I think they acted stupidly. And the whole world of right-wing commentators comes down on the president. Right, the very next day, Glenn Beck goes on the air and says, well, it's obvious that this president hates white people. If you criticize one white cop, you see, you hate white people. That's the logic of Glenn Beck. He said people, oh yes, absolutely. Rush Limbaugh goes on the air and says, it's a black president trying to destroy this white police officer. All he said was he acted stupidly. Now what's interesting was it was an accurate comment, because if you know the law in Massachusetts, which of course none of these guys on the radio know, right? And they're not going to do their homework and do research, so they don't find out. The law in Massachusetts for disorderly conduct is actually really clear. And it's been decided by the Supreme Court of that state on 2 occasions that it's not illegal to yell at a cop. Again, I don't advise it. Right? I'm not saying it's a good idea. I don't recommend that you do it when you're confronted by a police officer. But I'm saying it's not against the law. Even to yell at a cop in public does not meet the definition of disorderly conduct, let alone yelling at him in your own house. Or yelling at him on your porch. So when they arrested him, I mean, what do you call it when a cop arrests you for a crime you didn't commit? See, I call it stupid, right? Because if you're a cop, the idea is you're supposed to know the law. That sort of goes with the game. Like, that's part of getting the job, is you're supposed to know the law before you get to go enforce the law, right? But this guy is rolling around with his badge and his gun, doesn't even know what the law says. So the president calls him out, and then everybody says it's like a racist attack on white people to even critique what was in fact a stupid move. So that lets you know what kind of a sort of catch-22 the president's in. He can't talk about it. I think he can talk about it more than he does. I'm not trying to get him off the hook entirely. But I'm saying whenever he does talk about it, this is the kind of thing that happens. So that's the irony, right? On the one hand, the very reason that he could get elected, the very reason that this one individual black man can find himself in the position that he's in is by playing that whole rhetoric of racial transcendence during the campaign, right? That we're all one United States of America. We're not going to talk about race. We're going to downplay the divisions. We're all in the same boat. All that kind of stuff, right? That kind of rhetoric is what allowed white folks, just enough white folks, keep in mind, most white folks still didn't vote for him. You got 43.5% of the white vote. If he gets only 41.5% or 42%, he loses, right? So that's the margin of difference, literally, right? And you know that just enough of those white folks, by their own admission, because you can look at the survey data, I mentioned it in the book for those who have read it, that 60% or more of white folks will admit to their racial biases against black people. They'll just straight up admit it. And you know, most people won't admit what they believe. I mean, that's the thing about racial bias. Nowadays, you're not supposed to admit that. 50 years ago, they'd have been like, yeah, I don't like black people. And, you know, because 50 years ago, nobody would have thought twice about it. Now, we've made just enough progress to where we're supposed to hide our stuff, right? But 6 out of 10 white folks will still acknowledge it. So you know some of those folks still went and voted for that guy. Now, how does that happen? I don't like black people, but I like that one? What is that, right? That's just like carving out an exception. That's like turning the president into the Cliff Huxtable of American politics, right? The Bill Cosby character from The Cosby Show. Like, we don't like it. We like that one because we can identify with him. We're okay with him. And that's not meant as a criticism of the president. It's not meant as a criticism of Bill Cosby or Cliff Huxtable, the character. It's just meant as a statement of social and political reality that the very thing that allowed him to win was the idea that he's different, right? And yet it's the very thing that now makes it impossible for him to respond to even some of the overtly racist stuff that gets thrown at him. So when you have these rallies in the summer where folks are showing up with signs, I'm sure you've seen some of these, where it says Obamacare on the top, right? It's a critique of his healthcare plan, and it shows a picture of the president dressed in like witch doctor clothing with a bone through his nose, right? And it says Obamacare, and then they say, well, that's not racist. No, we're not being racist, you know. Or the signs that say, go back to Kenya. You know, that's not racist, right? And then they ask the president, do you think some of this is about race? And you know, the answer is obvious. Like when you portray the man as a witch doctor with a bone through his nose, and you know, you didn't do that with Bill Clinton back in '94 when he tried to reform healthcare, whatever it was. They didn't picture him that way, you know. It's obvious that it's a racial thing, but what does he have to say? He goes, oh, no, I'm sure it's not. I'm sure they're just upset about the economy. Really? Right? That's the kind of situation that this man finds himself in. So what does that mean for us?